there's some more seats over here for some of you people that are in the back.
Yeah, grab your coffee and sit. This is
Yeah,
conversational.
You know, and I'd like to start by just saying, essentially, this is casual, okay? I'm not a professional speaker. I'm just a guy that was lucky enough to have a pretty close relationship with a pretty unique individual. It may get emotional for me. I was a teenager. I was a young teenager when I first got to know him. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that I think he's different, a different kind of person when I knew him than what most of you read about from the things that have been written about him. I knew him in his older years here in Sun Valley, and I think he changed. I think he changed as he got older. And the man I knew basically was very compassionate. He was not the flamboyant, you know, I want to be all, I'm the head of the party or anything like that. He was a man that most often in the parties that I would attend, often at my parents' house or at their house, Papa would be over in the corner, and he'd be talking maybe to one or two people. And you know, it really didn't matter whether a 12-year-old boy or a 16-year-old boy was one of them. He just talked to you. And you know, as my mother stated in there, he was very gracious about that. He never wanted to be in the front of the scene, so to speak, as I knew him. You know, I mean, I've seen and read an awful lot about him. But his earlier days were like, you know, and how he was extraordinarily flamboyant and in the front of the scene. That was not important to him anymore, I think, when I knew him. And I'm going to speculate a little bit here. I think that while Mom and Dad were building their house up on the Sun Valley Lake, we stayed at the Etchen log cabins, which are currently the Ketchum Corral. And I think Papa was a couple of cabins down at the time, and I think that's where my father actually first got to know him. And then Dad was always interested in ranching, and so Bud Purdy was a very close friend of his. And then again, that connection with Papa and the Purdy family grew together with us. Another family in the community here that he was really, really close to was Dr. Saviors and his family. And Doc Saviors had 3 sons and a daughter. And I think my brother Peter and I and the Savior boys, frankly, were almost adopted by him. He spent a lot of time with us doing different things. I might as well start talking about the hunting because I also learned to hunt with Papa, and it began by me carrying an air rifle, and I'd walk with Mom and with Papa in the field, usually down at Silver Creek along the streams. We almost always just jump shot. I don't really recall throwing decoys out at all and sitting in a blind with him. And we were always walking. He liked to walk, and so the first year I had to carry this air rifle, and he said, "Now I want you to sight it on a duck when the duck takes off." And I'd sight it, I'd pull the trigger, and you get the pop, and that was pretty cool. The next year I worked all summer at the Sun Valley bike shop, and I made enough money to be able to buy a Remington 700 shotgun. And so the the following season, I was able to go out and hunt with my mother and Papa and have an actual shotgun. But one of the things that he was really interested in was teaching gun safety and making sure that I was going to be a safe person to hunt with in the field, which was a smart thing to do. But there were two things when I finally was able to carry a shotgun. I was only allowed to put one round in it. You should tell three, but I was only allowed to put one round in it. And there were two purposes, Papa said, for that. Number one, he felt a lot more comfortable after he heard me shoot. He could concentrate a little more on his own shot. And the second thing was, he said, you know, if you only have one shot, you really have to focus on what you're doing. You're not going to get a backup. So pay attention to that one shot and make it count. And there's still some more seats up here if you guys want to move forward. I mean, it's fine with me. So that was kind of a learning experience for me. It got me started in hunting. Papa liked to hunt with my parents. He was the kind of fellow that he liked to have someone there, whether it was just mother or mother and myself, or dad and myself, or Bud Purdy. He liked to hunt with Gary Cooper a lot when Coop was in town. And again, primarily from my experiences, it was all down at the Silver Creek area. I was really lucky enough, my father at the time had just built what is known as the Stocker Creek Ranch. And the Stocker Creek Ranch then immediately abutted the Sun Valley Company Ranch, which my father leased. And so we had that stretch of where Stocker Creek and essentially Grove Creek come together to form Silver Creek. And that's where we did our hunting and our fishing for the most part. You'll see a little cabin down there. We're going to have a field trip down there. My father built that cabin, which we called the retreat, because if we didn't want to have to drive down in the mornings really early, we could spend the night in the cabin and then go out and start fishing in the morning. And we did that quite a bit. That's now what we call the Nature Conservancy. So that's a place that my brother and mother and father and I had a chance to grow up and spend a lot of time, which was pretty special. You know, you heard Mother talking a little bit about pheasant hunting, and back in those days, there actually were a scattered amount of pheasants along Silver Creek, and again, because the cover was a lot better and the farming situation was a lot different. But we would hunt along there. One of the things that Papa to me was a fellow that he built many traditions, okay? And one of the things that he said was, you know, when you shoot a drake mallard, it takes the tail feathers. My mother then would make pins for Papa to put on his vest or his hat, or for me too. You know, it took me a few ducks before I ever got a gray. But that was a pretty big deal. This is a photograph here, and this is Bud Purdy, who happens to have a bird in his hand, and this is Papa. Ruth Purdy is in the background here, and then this is my father. I can't tell you whether or not we were on our ranch or on Bud's ranch in this particular photograph, but there was a lot of fun hunting together. And that photo will be up here. You guys can take a look at it. One of the other things with regard to shooting was the fact that Bud used to sponsor a shoot at what we called the Gun Club, which was a little building down on Silver Creek. It's still there as part of his fishing situation and whatnot. But back in the day, there was actually a bounty on magpies, 11 cents, 11 cents per bird. One of the things that Bud's hired hand, Dad's hired hand would do was they would go out and capture magpies. A real simple way to do that was to build a chicken wire cage. You put some heavy fish leader on the outside in loops, you shoot a rabbit, put it inside, and you will catch magpies. Then they would put them in a gunny sack. We'd go down to Bud's, the gun club, as we called it, and then basically would have a live bird shoot. And one of the things that was really a big deal, if we were one of the kids there, was being able to be the bird thrower. And that was a really big thing. And I'm still looking through photographs. I do have some pictures somewhere, if they haven't been destroyed, of Papa actually shooting down at the club and being able to see the fall of the magpie. But that was a lot of fun, and it was great. Kids were never allowed to shoot in that, by the way. We were only the worker bees. There's this particular, underneath the computer here, there's a cup that was a trophy that Papa put together that my mother won as the best female shot in one of the magpie shoots. And he would bring little awards like these things. And again, I think it was really kind of to build traditions, little tiny traditions that he did. One of the other things I want to say is that when he was here, he also was really part of the community. He basically had a daily routine, and he would be at the post office at 10 o'clock. I don't really know if it was 10 o'clock or 10:30, but basically he would be in the same place at about the same time every single day, which was really neat. And he didn't just, go in and get his mail. He stopped and he talked to people, and there were people that he would, see on a daily basis. One of his good friends was a fellow by the name of Paul Railroad. Paul was a hunting and fishing guy for Sun Valley Company, and so they used to trade stories quite a bit about hunting and fishing. And on a particular occasion, Paul's wife, who worked at Pete Lane's, was pregnant and unfortunately had a miscarriage. And Papa stood in the post office and cried when he got that news. Again, kind of a different person than you might read about, okay? I mean, that kind of humanity that he showed was, again, really impressive to me as a young boy. It was a pretty neat thing. Part of the routine, again, we were lucky enough that it sort of ended his, well, it didn't really end his day, but somewhere around 3:30, he very, very often, almost daily, would show up at our house and want to go for a walk out what would now be the Fairway Road. And essentially, it didn't matter who was home, whether it was Mom, Dad, my brother Peter, or myself. We'd all go for a walk with Papa, for about a half an hour or so. If nobody was home, we took our dog. But on one particular occasion, it was just Papa and myself out walking. And I'll never forget this. He said, we're walking along, and he said, Jed, I can kick a beer can higher than anybody else in the world. Lo and behold, years later, in front of the Atlantic Company, here's Papa. And I ran into this magazine. I don't know where, this is dated '69. And I saw that picture and I said, you bet he can. But that is, that's, I think, a very special thing, And again, it's just one of those little things that he'd say, to try and make you feel comfortable and, you know, part of his life and things like that. Another issue that was pretty interesting, Papa was over at Papa and Mary, and I talk about him, I mean, Mary's involved in this an awful lot as well. But Papa and Mary and the Saviors family was over at our house, and we were watching For Whom the Bell Tolls on television. And, you know, that was quite an experience. And I think something broke for commercial or something, but all of a sudden Papa stands up and he goes, "It's time, it's time." My brother, myself, and the three Savior boys are all sitting on the couch watching. We're kind of in the back couch. We rearranged our living room for this particular situation. And he says, "The boys need to learn how to drink out of wine." Much to my mother's horror. Because we're sitting on her couch, and we are going to try to learn how to drink out of one of these. She immediately dashed into the bathroom, picked up a handful of towels, covered her down. And in the meantime, Papa was in filling up a Voda bag. And so he brings it out, and I don't even remember, quite frankly, the sequence of how we were seated. But we're on the couch, and we're starting with the Voda bag here, you know. And passing along, passing it back, and we're here. No, Papa says, no. So, each one of us got a little wet. We extended our arms and we drank out of the boat bag. And I mean, you know, these things have kind of a personal feeling for me. My brother and I used to take a Voda bag with us when we go hiking. You know, and it was really probably because of that, because there were better ways to carry wine. The one thing that I do remember is, and it might be this bag in the case there. This is not a bag that he gave me. This is one that I just bought because I wanted to have one. This one may be lined with tar. And that's what the Voda bag was when we drank out of it. They did, you know, some of them were coming into plastic covers inside, which this one has. But the old ones and the original ones all were lined with tar to make them waterproof, and you could taste it. You get a much better flavor out of a bag like that. One of the other things, we also had the opportunity and the pleasure of watching The Old Man and the Sea with Papa at our house on television. And the only thing that I can remember vividly out of that was how sort of angry Papa was at Spencer Tracy. He did not like working with him, and Papa was always on the scene when they did the movies. I guess co-directing or whatever he was doing. But I can remember him berating Tracy, you know, as we're sitting there watching that movie. But it was still quite a thrill to be able to do that and have him in the room. You know, he would mutter about this or mutter about that as we're going through. And the same with For Whom the Bell Tolls. I mean, it was, you know, even though I was young, it's a pretty vivid memory in my mind, you know, to see us in the room with the man who wrote these pieces. One of the other things that he did for me was, from time to time when he was over at our house for dinner, I, being a younger guy, would of course adjourn and go to bed earlier. And very often, this is going to get hard, he'd come in and read The Old Man and the Sea to me out of this book. We didn't get a chance to finish it. We did not get a chance to finish it. But it meant something to have him sit on the bed and to read this. He gave my parents, our family, most of his books. And they're signed, they're not in great shape. But he also, and you'll see over here, he also stayed in good contact with us. And there are little things when books came out, and I'll leave these out, you can kind of see, you can very faintly see a message that he wrote. That was on the Green Hills of Africa. Here's another one that he wrote. Merry Christmas to Women Neats from the Ketchen bunch of the Hemingsteins. That's how he signed the books often. And then this was another one from Whom the Bell Tolls, To Neats with Love, Hemingstein, 1959. So those are some of the things that I remember, you know, and he had a large influence on my life. I became an English major because of him. I had terrific experiences. I think he gave his community terrific experiences. You know, I read in the paper with the young man, or the man who stole his elk horns, that, you know, he came to find out why Hemingway came to catch him. But if you read his books and you listen to, you know, things about Papa, virtually any time that there was peace in his writings, it was in the mountains. And he found peace here. He found peace because of the people. He found peace because of the hunting. He found peace because of the environment. Pretty neat, pretty neat. And I think we're just all really, really lucky. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. I mean, I'll try to answer questions if you have any questions. Again, just remember, this is one person's perspective. You know, a lot of people here know him, and a lot of people here love him. Thank you.
Jed will take questions for a few moments and then also be around as people are walking and looking more closely at the materials. Jed, you have shared the opportunity, I mean the really rare opportunity to get to watch Ernest Hemingway write. Could you talk about that?
Forgot to talk about that, yeah. At one occasion, and only one occasion, Papa invited me to come over to the house and watch him write. And there used to be a small building where the Hemingway house is, and I don't know how many of you have been to the Hemingway house, but there was a small building that was detached, and that's where he was writing. And it was a very simple thing. It as I recall, a square room. He had a stand-up desk that was out towards the river, facing towards the river, his typewriter, a stack of paper, and a wastebasket. And when I was able to go there, essentially there was a wooden chair in the back of the room. And I had explicit instructions from my mother not to say a word, which I followed. But it was fascinating, you know, to watch Papa, and you could see the frustration. He would type. He was a good typist. He could type. He'd type, and he'd stop and he'd read, and sometimes he'd continue on typing, and sometimes he'd pull it out. He'd look at it, wastebasket, and then he'd stand there, and he'd reload. He'd start typing again. You could, you know, I didn't know much at that age, but you could see the frustration that was there. And I think that was very hard for him. I will tell you that my parents were the second people that were called when he killed himself. And they went over to the house with Mary, along with George Saviors, who was the first person that was called. One of the other interesting things I'm just recalling here is that my mother was a pretty devout Catholic, and Papa had a Catholic influence when he was growing up. And as he was getting to know her and getting to know us and whatnot, he actually started talking to Mom about Catholicism, about God. And that was something he was taking to heart, and it was meaningful for him. And when he was buried, there was a Catholic mass for him, which I got to be an altar boy. And he was buried essentially by the Catholic priest. And if we're talking about the cemetery, I'll tell you a couple little more stories too. If we're talking about the cemetery, one of the other people, I'm sorry, I can ramble on. One of the other people that was very dear to him was a fishing guide up in Sun Valley called Taylor Williams. And Taylor had no money whatsoever. Just a salty old guy who was a hell of a fisherman, taught me to fish, taught my brother to fish, fly fish. And, he died, Taylor died, and there was no place to put him, so Papa bought him a spot in the cemetery. And if you go up there, you'll see that Taylor Williams is buried next to Papa. Again, that's the kind of guy he was. He loved people. He really did love people. So, I don't know, there are probably more things that I can think of down the road, but that, I think it's really important for you all to understand this side of who he was, and I think you should love him for that.
Are there other questions?
Jed?
Yeah.
I know that Gene Van Gilder is in the Ketchum Cemetery, which was the basis of his eulogy, best of all, let it fall. But did Ernest Hemingway or the family purposely buy some plots close to Van Gilder?
I really don't know yet. I can't answer that. I mean, I don't know. I think probably when Papa bought this plot for Taylor, he bought a series.
Right.
And if you go out there,
Yes.
you can see that because the family's lined up there.
Well, it's interesting that in that whole just area, you have Gene Van Gilder, Taylor Williams, Chuck and Floss Atkinson, then Mary, then Ernest, and Jack.
Yeah.
They're all there.
I do want to tell you one of the stories that has nothing to do with Papa himself. But I was out at the cemetery. And I was visiting my folks, and I thought, well, gosh, I'll walk over to say hi to Papa. And I walked over, and there were two young Hispanic women there looking at the gravesite. And I came over, and I'm there for a moment, and I said, well, do you gals read a lot of Hemingway? And they said, oh, no, we're here to thank Mr. Hemingway for creating that wonderful grade school. I thought that was pretty endearing. Anyway, sir.
About hanging the birds.
Oh, God. So, Papa would hang his birds in the garage. And I can't substantiate this, but the word was that he hung them until they fell, which was a little rough. I can tell you that I much preferred my mother's duck à l'orange to his roast duck. They were pretty ripe, but yes, he did hang the birds, sir. Both pheasants and ducks. Yeah.
About bird hunting, what about the dogs?
Dogs? I don't recall dogs.
So no dogs in the party?
I don't well, Bud had a dog. Meter, it was a, God, I can't remember what kind of dog it was. Anyway, here's Bud's dog. So, I mean, they would go out, and when Mom and I were with them, you know, I did most of the retrieving. Even in the water. But you know, Papa didn't have a dog that I can recall at all here.
Yeah.
And we had a dog that was simply a non-hunting dog. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. You
Sure.
mentioned that he found peace in the mountains, and that's how we can kind of connect with his writing with
Yeah.
this area. Is there a story or a passage or a quote that kind of stands out that resonates with this area and him?
Not his writings. Not his writings. But I mean, if you look at almost all of his writings, you know, there's this turmoil, whether it be war or you know, trouble with a relationship or whatever, and then he goes to high country and things alter, you know, for his characters. But I can't think of any kind of a quote. I mean, there's certainly no direct references that I know in readings I've done with regard to Ketchum. Yeah. Another one who was good friends was Hotchner. I mean, he would be here sometimes as well, and we'd go out hunting, and then they'd go to Europe together. My parents never did join him in Europe. He always invited them, wanted to go to, you know, watch the bullfights and things like that. That never really came to fruition. Yeah.
So you're talking about having the opportunity to watch him write.
Yeah.
And we had quite a bit of frustration
Uh-huh.
while you were watching him. Do you know about the time, like what time that was?
I don't.
No?
You know, the flaw in my life is the fact that I can't remember what specifically happened on a given year.
Yeah.
I don't have a good calendar for that in my head.
I'm just curious to know if was the end he really struggled with writing. And I imagine.
I'm going to guess that, you know, it was probably closer to the end. You know, I don't think he would probably let a 12-year-old boy who would have been jittery, you know, so it might have been, you know, when I was 15, 16 years old or so. So I don't know, you know, I'm going to guess it was 58, 59 or so.
Okay.
And that would align with, so when they had the house was 59, 60, 61, so
Yeah.
that aligns
Yeah.
with that timing.
Yeah.
Well, when you were that boy sitting in the chair watching Hemingway write,
Yeah.
was he writing, do you know, a movable feast?
I don't know what he was writing. I don't know what he was, I was afraid to ask. My mother said, don't talk. I didn't. Yeah.
I remember when I was a lot younger that Hemingway, this is just interesting to me that he wrote Standing Up, but I recall...
He had a back problem from
plane crashes.
yeah, plane
But
crash.
even before that, that was what, plane crashes were in 53, something like that.
Well, actually, in one of the wars that he was being a correspondent on, he had a back injury. And walking was incredibly important, and standing to write. He couldn't sit in a chair for long. And the same thing at parties. You wouldn't see him sitting down, you'd see him standing.
But
anyway, go ahead.
What was interesting to me was when you're explaining, watching him, that he would get frustrated, pull the paper out, crumple it up, and throw it in the wastebasket.
Yeah, he'd look at it.
Yeah, and I recall reading somewhere that he made a statement that, you know, it should fall like a leaf in the wastebasket. And I was teaching.
Maybe on the other side of the desk.
Well, I
Once he was
never
going to
allowed
keep.
students to crumple their papers when I was an educator, and I always use that as an excuse that it should fall. Getting a lot more into.
My recollection would would be that maybe the leaves fell on the page that he was going to keep.
I was wondering, because he got so frustrated, maybe that he started taking.
Yeah,
completely throwing it.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, you know, bam, we're gonna start again.
I would never do that.
Along those lines, did you get a sense of why he was frustrated? Was he just dissatisfied with his
Good,
writing?
right.
Just, I don't think it was something his.
I don't care if you want to call it writer's block or, you know, starting to form some dementia or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I was young.
Right.
I didn't know about what those kinds of things were. But he was frustrated because he couldn't just flow on the keys. He couldn't flow with his writing. And I mean, I think that's what he was used to, particularly being a correspondent. My God, you know, he just whip a story out. I mean, the way he could type when he was on a roll was fascinating. I mean, it was very, very quick. But then he'd freeze and stop. So, you know, I mean, and again, part of what I'm saying about this is things I've read. You know, I know he was depressed. You know, I know about the Mayo Clinic visits and things like that and whatnot. They didn't ring into me at the time because I was young. You know, I only really kind of understand all of that after I got into the college years and started reading about him and things like that. So it was frustration of not being able to do what he'd done so well in his life. Yeah.
Have you heard why his papers went to the John F. Kennedy Library?
No, I'm really angry that anything is not either here in Cuba or Key West. You'll see over here, by the way, these are some advanced galley proofs of The Old Man of the Sea, which just so oddly enough, a real estate client of mine, I did some service for, got on a property that he wanted, it was a little bit difficult, etc. A fellow from Philadelphia. And you know, we talked a little bit about Hemingway, and he pried some stories out of me and whatnot. And lo and behold, he said, you know, I've got the galley cruise for The Old Man of the Sea. And he said, I think you should have them. So they're sitting there. They now belong to the library. So.
How did he have it?
I don't know that. I don't know that. I truly don't. Hey, he didn't end up with them, we did. You know? Sure.
Did he have any favorite hiking trails when you went on walks?
You know, again, most of the walking that I did with him was either along Silver Creek or on what is now Fairway Road, which was actually a dirt road at the time. You know, and it was going out to the gun club. The old gun club used to sit down below where the fairways are, and you know, it was a nice long straight shot where, you know, you just out and back. There was no messing around. I mean, you know, you just go out unless he wanted to tell you about kicking a can, which I never found one when we were walking together. But yeah, no, I don't recall any trails. Most of the trails around here back in those days, my father was running the stables for Sun Valley Company, and most of the trails that we're all hiking on today were all horse trails. You know, that's why we have such great hiking trails and mountain bike trails here. Because, you know, back in those days, my golly, I think Dad had about 90 head of horses, and we had a corral up by the Sun Valley Inn, and, you know, no fewer than 10 guides, and there were people going out all day long. And I mean, if you take a look at what's going on today, the whole horseback industry is really dwindled here. We used to run a trail ride on Sundays out to Trail Creek Cabin for breakfast, and there'd be 30 people in that trail ride. You know, Kathy knows, she was here. Sir?
Did he teach you natural history?
No.
Birding?
He taught me to be observant as we were out in the field. You know, taught me to look for things, you know, and that I still hunt, and I hunt birds, and I hunt elk, And I think that frankly, training your eye at a young age like that to pick up movement or to pick up, anomalies in what you're looking at, he taught me to look, taught me to be observant. And he obviously had to be observant.
How many people in Ketchum when you were growing up?
Let's put it this way, I had 12 kids in my grade school class.
You went to school, you went to high school in Haley?
No, I did not. I went to boarding school. I went to Ketchum Grade School, which is where Atkinson's Market is now.
Yeah.
And again, my class was fairly typical. I had 12 kids. It was a fairly small community at that time. I would say there's maybe 1,000 people,
Right.
maybe. There was really nothing out Warm Springs. It was all pretty much around the city center.
I think one more question before we break. Are there any more? Or you can try to get Jed after, Marcia.
Jed, I just
Yeah.
have one comment, and that is, when we went to Cuba 4 years ago,
Yeah.
we met Ada Rosales at the Finca, at his home there, and then we brought her to Ketchum a couple of years ago for
Right.
this festival.
I met her with you.
Yeah, and the best thing was when she got off the plane, she had been the director at the Finca for about 20 years and had had no contact at all about Ketchum. She got off the plane and the first thing she said to us was, "Now I understand why you would come to Ketchum." So it relates to.
So, Bill Vanderbilt, a good friend of mine, traveling friend of mine, his wife and I are going to Cuba in May. And what one of my goals is, and Bill and Annie's goal is, we're going to try and do a lot of photography of how Hemingway used Havana. And we want to bring those pictures back to the library so we can have them mounted and be part of our collection of the Hemingway experience, because, again, a lot of his experience was Cuba, Ketchum. And I think it's important for us to have that other aspect of it here. So we're going to give that a shot and see if we can't get that done. I've talked to Muriel Hemingway. She's going to try and get us in the house as well. Anything we can do to, I think, enhance what we've started here is really important. And I think it's important. I'm just so excited to see how many people are sitting in this room, actually, that care about what happened and care about Papa. So thanks again. Thanks to you. We reconvene at the library in the lecture hall at 10:30.